Welcome back to Archaeology After Dark, everyone. I am, of course, your host, Daniel Rhodes, and my guests today are.
Hi, my name is Jen Janofsky. I'm a professor of public history at Rowan University in New Jersey, and I am the director of Red Bank Battlefield Park and the co-director of the Red Bank Archaeology Project.
And my name's Wade Katz. I'm a professional archaeologist. I have my own consulting firm called South River Heritage Consulting, and I work with Jen as the co-director at the Red Bank Battlefield Archaeology Project.
And that brings us to what we are talking about today. I know you all have heard me say that we're going to be talking a lot about Revolutionary War archaeology. And today we're going to be talking about the Battle of Red Bank. So, correct me if I'm wrong, that was New Jersey, 1777. Am I right?
Correct.
Okay. So, it was a colonial victory, right?
It was a rather unanticipated victory. The Rhode Island regiments were defending Fort Mercer from an attacking Hessian force, and it ended up being one of the worst losses of Hessian life in the Revolution.
So, in the grand scheme of things, what did Red Bank mean for the revolutionary effort? Like, it was a step in the right direction towards victory, but every battle adds a little bit more of a picture to the whole.
Yeah, I'll take this one, Jen, if you'd like. You're part of the Philadelphia campaign. So the battle at Red Bank is part of the larger Philadelphia campaign, which is the attempt by and an ultimate successful attempt by Crown forces to take Philadelphia, which is at that time the capital of the new nation. There's a series of battles fought in southeastern Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, beginning in late August, September of and early September of 1777. The ones that are most well known, Battle of Brandywine is September 11th. There's maneuvering in southeastern Pennsylvania. You get a battle at Paoli at the night of the 21st of or 20th, 21st of September. And then Philadelphia is taken on the 26th of September by the Crown forces. They outmaneuver Washington's army and are able to walk into Philadelphia. But just because they take Philadelphia doesn't mean you've won the war. The Crown forces had cut themselves off from their supplies line, which was the Delaware River and the Royal Navy. And so then you have a series of additional actions that occur, one in Germantown on the 4th of October, which is an attack by Washington's army onto one of the outlying portions of the British forces, the Hessian and British forces. That's an almost success for the Americans, but not quite. And so then it pushes everything down to the Delaware River Valley, where we have two fortifications, Fort Mercer and Fort Mifflin, up on opposite sides of the Delaware River. The place where Jen and I work is at Fort Mercer, which is on the New Jersey side of the Delaware River, and Fort Mifflin, which is on the Pennsylvania side of the river. And those are joined by obstructions that had been sunken into the Delaware River by the continental forces, the colonial forces, which prevent a navy from coming up the river. And behind those obstructions is a Pennsylvania Navy, which is small but formidable and enough of a threat to the Royal Navy that they are justifiably concerned about the smaller vessels that sit behind these obstructions. So even though you're holding Philadelphia, you can't get your supplies up the river to Philadelphia. So that leads to this campaign to remove first Fort Mercer, second Fort Mifflin, and eventually the obstructions. And that then in turn leads to a direct assault on Fort Mercer in late October of 1777 by a reinforced Hessian infantry brigade. The intent being to storm that fort by direct assault rather than siege, a direct assault. So then that leads to the engagement that we've been working on at Fort Mercer and the information and the archaeology that we've got.
So, when did you all start excavating at Fort Mercer? I assume this isn't like a recent project.
So Wade and I first worked together back in 2014. We had received a grant from the American Battlefield Protection Program to do a phase 1 study of the battlefield. Weirdly, there had not been a formal archaeology survey of the battlefield. Lots of informal avocational archaeology taking place there, but this was the first systematic study of the battlefield. Very successful project. One of the things that Wade and I talked a lot about was how engaged visitors were at the park with the archaeology team. They really were interested in learning more about archaeology, how archaeology works, thrilled to hold an artifact as it was coming out of the ground. You know, as a practicing public historian, for me, this was public history magic to see people so engaged and so excited to learn about the archaeological process. In 2020, the park had the opportunity to purchase a small 1/4 acre parcel to the northern boundary of the park that, for whatever reason, had never been incorporated into the 44 acres that we are today. I called Wade up to see if he was interested in working again, and we created like a large-scale public archaeology project to survey this parcel. So over the course of 4 days, we had 100 volunteers who learned how to screen, learned how to trowel, learned how to process and identify artifacts, and it was a wildly successful program. On the last day, June 26, 2022, is when one of our volunteers who had archaeology experience discreetly told Wade and I think I found a bone. And that was the beginning of the Hessian Archaeology Project.
And that's if the article I read correctly, it said you found the remains of 13 Hessian soldiers. Is that right?
So that was the initial report was 13. We actually found the remains of 15 once we were able to examine what we actually had. This is not a burial ground like formal burial ground cemetery. This is a burial space where body parts have been buried. And that's really what we found at the bottom of this fortification ditch. These are soldiers who were killed in the battle, and then their remains were pushed into a portion of the fortification ditch that the fort had been abandoned. This section of the fort had been abandoned. And I think it gets used as the burial space for a large number of Hessian soldiers that died there. We define the 15 individuals that we have principally based on elements of your skull, crania. So we have mandibles, so we have mostly maxilla and mandibles. We don't really, and we have a number of long bones associated with legs. But we don't have large amounts of torsos. We don't have arms. We just have parts, body parts.
So what I guess with so little information, is there a way you could go about identifying who these people were? Like, how do you know that they were, in fact, Hessian soldiers?
So the initial archaeological work, where we were was in a section of the fort, as I said, that had been abandoned, and then the fort itself was an earthen fortification. So the soils of that fort wall eventually slumped back down into the ditch and covered the bodies that had been left, or the body parts that had been left in the bottom. The artifacts in association with those remains are impacted musket balls that are clearly of the caliber that are Patriot weapons. They are likely to be associated with the Rhode Island regiments that defended that fort. We recovered a number of buttons, unmarked buttons, also in association with those, and some others, fewer artifacts. But essentially, we had about 100 artifacts at the bottom of the fortification ditch that clearly are associated with this trauma that occurred. We also then have had the human remains. They are currently with the New Jersey State Police Forensics Lab, which agreed, and we can talk about how that happened, but basically they became the custodians of the human remains, and through the process of examination, we have been able to identify two of those individuals by facial reconstruction. We've also gone back and looked at the Hessian record of the soldiers that fought at the site, and through the documentary record, are able to determine in all likelihood, who these individuals are. And in all likelihood, we know that we know from the record, there were a large number of Hessian soldiers killed outright on the day of the battle. The number of Rhode Island defenders is much, much smaller. This is not a space where you would have buried the Rhode Island defenders. This is an area where the remains of the assault force were buried. We have not ever been able to find the Rhode Islanders, but we don't believe these are the Rhode Island soldiers. There are musket balls in direct association with these men, and they are of the right caliber to be Charleville or Patriot weapons, not German weapons.
Okay. So
Jen, if
Jen,
you want to add anything to that, maybe.
This is a public history question. It's a sensitive subject, finding human remains on a battlefield and also explaining that to people like this is, you know, something terrible happened here, but you also need to create a learning space out of it. How do you go doing that at your site?
Slowly and carefully. It is definitely, as you said, it's a very sensitive subject. And, Wade and I do presentations on this project all the time, and invariably someone has a pretty strong reaction to the information that we are sharing with them. And so, number one, it's always important to prepare your audience for the conversation that you're going to have. And so, blindsiding somebody with, the violence of a Revolutionary War battlefield, you really need to set them up to understand what we're going to be discussing, and to give them an opportunity to tag out if this is something that, they're not wanting to engage with. Particularly important, we engage a lot with veteran populations, and so we understand that they can be particularly sensitive to discussions of battlefield violence. And so prepping the audience is huge. Working with our docents and our volunteers to be sensitive about how we are discussing the violence. Like, we're not here to give graphic details for the sake of being graphic and gory. We share this information so that people can get a better appreciation for what the realities of a Revolutionary War battlefield were. And so, as we enter the 250th, we're seeing lots of fifes and drumming and battle reenactments, but what's missing from a lot of these conversations is the underlying violence that is associated with these events and what these soldiers experienced. And so, I think it's really important to meet people where they're at in these conversations, to be constantly processing how your audience is receiving the information and understanding that, maybe today we don't take the conversation as far as we normally do because people have had enough. Other audiences really want to engage with it. And so you can sort of, based on feedback and how people are reacting, go a little bit deeper into the conversation and talk a little bit more, for example, about how forensic anthropology can understand the human body as an artifact and an artifact of violence. Talking about the type of injuries that the soldiers experienced, which, as Wade said, we basically had battlefield gore. And so, what is it like at the end of the day when the Rhode Islanders have to clear the battlefield of these individuals? What was their lived experience like in seeing the violence? And so, we actually have an incredibly powerful piece of material culture. It's called the Burlingame Powder Horn. John Burlingame was part of the Rhode Island regiment that was charged with clearing the field on October 23rd. He was 17 years old on the day of the battle, and while we didn't have any formal written documentation of where the mass burial site was, John Burlingame's powder horn actually has exactly where these individuals were. You have bodies, decapitated bodies, limbs at the bottom of the trench. And so we do talk a lot about what John Burlingame's experience was like, because we know as public historians that people engage with people. And so if we can try to complicate their worldview a little bit about what the revolution was like, then we've done our job.
Yeah, and that's something that I especially like doing as a public archaeologist is when you see like that moment of clarity come across somebody's face, like, wow, this actually happened. Like, this blows my mind that honestly, in the grand scheme of things, 250 years wasn't that long ago. I mean, especially, speaking as an archaeologist, 250 years is like snapping your fingers.
Yeah. We have also tried to recognize that these soldiers were buried rather unceremoniously in the bottom of this ditch. The day after the battle, Rhode Island troops are charged with cleaning this up, and we know that from some of the regimental reports and first-person accounts. So that our project team has always tried to approach this to provide a level of respect and dignity to these men who didn't receive that at the time that they went into the ground. So where Jen indicated we give a lot of presentations here, we do our best to not be gratuitous in anything that we show. These were human beings. They have descendants in all likelihood somewhere around the world, and it's important not to treat them as just something to gawk at. That is not what our intent here is at all. So the ultimate goal will be to try to reinter these men as close to the location where they came out of the ground as we possibly can. We also have been following up with a number of scientific inquiries, including DNA studies and stable isotope analysis, to try to even further define who these individuals are. The paper record that we have is complete for some of the units that fought there, but not for others. And so what we're trying to do is combine all of those sources of information in the best possible way we can to squeeze as much information out of this as we can. I don't think any other study in the United States is currently looking at Hessian soldiers to the level that we are. Hessians are often seen kind of at a 30,000 foot level. They're a mercenary unit that fights in North America for the British, but this gives us an opportunity to really see the humanity that is inherent in any military formation and learn something about who those soldiers are.
Yeah, and that's something I think a lot of people are taking a look at, especially with Ken Burns's new Revolutionary War special, is they're looking at things that haven't necessarily been brought into the light during the 250th, like, the minorities, like women, Native Americans, African Americans who actually served in the revolution that, we don't talk about on a day-to-day basis, but it's time that we start telling everybody's story. Everybody was a person during the revolution and they all played a part, whether they were, George Washington famous or some guy who just made horseshoes in a small town.
Yeah, I agree with you, Daniel. In fact, that's the mission at Red Bank Battlefield Park is to tell the inclusive stories, the whole story. For years, the story of the Black soldiers' experience in the Rhode Island Regiment was not shared at our park, fairly deliberately, I will add, that historians literally wrote their participation out of the battle. And it's not until really the past 15 years that this story has been shared with our park visitors, and it is an ongoing research project. A lot of people still are not familiar that the Rhode Island Regiment, who defended Fort Mercer, was a fully integrated fighting force of African American and Native American soldiers fighting side by side with white soldiers. And this is the great paradox of the American Revolution. You have individuals who are marginalized by American society. They're committing to fighting for the American cause. And that's a remarkable moment in history. And that's a really powerful moment of connection for our park visitors because now you can sort of see yourself in that story. You brought up George Washington. Most of us can't identify with George Washington. He's sort of untouchable, but average Rhode Islanders, yeah, I think we can have a connection with them. And that's where people get really excited because they see themselves in that moment in time.
Yeah, those are my like favorite artifacts to look at. It's like the personal stuff that somebody left behind, especially like the crafts people, because they would have to fine tune like their instruments just for this one specific purpose. Like say it's a person who works with leather, they would make just this tiny drill bit so they could make just this precise tiny hole, but it also tells you something about that person and their attention to detail in their work.
That is definitely a very fun moment of connection for our students. We have a field school run through Rowan University. Every summer, we have 15 or so students working at Red Bank Battlefield Park, learning about the archaeological process and also learning about how to talk to people, how to work with the public to appreciate the important role that archaeology plays in preservation and interpretation. And those first few days, when students are discovering their first artifacts, the look on their face is just priceless. It is the best moment. But then it's like, okay, you found this really great object. There are 5 people over here taking a walk in the park. Now go share that with them, right? Like go engage with them and get them excited. Like spread the energy around. And it's such a powerful and amazing moment.
Yeah, that's the fun thing about archaeology, aside from the thousand other things that are fun about archaeology, is the teaching and teachable moments. Like it hits that student that wow, they have learned something, but they can also share that knowledge with somebody else now.
Yeah, it's enjoyable to watch them kind of grow with what they're seeing and then begin to think about what those objects mean. And in the park where we are, we don't just get Revolutionary War material, we get material that takes us up into the 21st century. The park was created in 1906, and so we often get commemorative objects from the 20th century that are in theory trying to commemorate an event that occurred, 100 and some years earlier. And so you get this odd mix of things of we get reenactor material all the time, and sometimes it's masquerading like original material, which creates issues, right? You're looking at these artifacts going like, wait a minute, that's not supposed to be here. Where did that come from? And turns out it's a reenactor, and they've been out there since the 1970s doing annual reenactments of the Battle of Red Bank. We recover their artifacts and the things that they leave behind. But we also recover other objects that are related to the commemorative actions from the 1930s, the 1940s. There's a broad range of things that we'll find. And we've been looking at other sections of the fort. The fort itself is a massive, massive construction. And we've recovered wooden sections now of the fort that I don't think on any other Revolutionary War fort anything like that has been found. These are sections that once the fort is abandoned, in November, the British come in and burn the fort, destroy it, take about 3 days to do that. But it's difficult to conceive how you can destroy a fort of the size and magnitude that this was. So I think what you see is that they burned all the woodwork. They maybe cut holes through the walls, but they definitely didn't completely knock it down and destroy it. And we've been able to recover some elements of the wooden construction that went into that fort.
So, it's the America 250. I've said that a couple of times now. What events or special projects are y'all looking forward to this year?
Yeah, we've got a really good calendar coming up. I'm excited for it. We always have seasonal festivals, and so we have a large spring festival coming up, and we have a butterfly festival in the summer because we are a public park. We're also a nature park in addition to being a history park. Those events are wonderful because they bring young families who are frequently visiting for the first time, and so we can sort of invite them to explore not only the nature of the park, but the history of the park, which is really exciting. We have Family Archaeology Day, which is coming up at the end of June. And this is an event where we invite our students from field school to sort of showcase their units, the artifacts that they've been finding, really putting into practice all the good public history and archaeology training they've been doing for the past 6 weeks. Our big event, our signature event, is in October, and that's our annual battle reenactment. And we're really excited. We're very hopeful that we're going to be able to dedicate a new historical marker to Black participation in the battle because we were recently recognized by the New Jersey Historical Commission to be included in their Black Heritage History Trail. And so this is definitely helping to raise visibility about what we had discussed earlier about telling the full and inclusive stories of the park.
So you guys have a field school coming up in May, right? That's when you start your next one. What are you guys looking forward to out of that?
So so we've run a field school now 3 years. This will be the fourth year of the field school, and we move into different sections of the park or the fort and kind of examining different areas. Last year we were was the first opportunity to really excavate inside the remnants of the fort itself, and we will do that again this year, moving over to another section that puts us next to the wall and then probably do an excavation on the exterior of the wall. The history of this site is that in the 1930s, a branch of the Works Progress Administration came in and did some work at the fort and sort of enhanced the fortification ditch by, I think, piling the dirt that they excavated on the outside of the fortification wall, which creates sort of an artificial mound and a place where there shouldn't be a mound, right? You would want your exterior side of your fort ditch to be as flat as possible so you have a good field of fire if you need it. So if we excavate through that redeposited soil, we should hit the original topsoil, one, and then be able to work on the outside of the fort at what the original ground surface was, and also do the same thing on the inside of the fort and see if we can't recover some interior edges of the earthen embankment wall. Last year, we recovered a regimental button from the unit that did the work that built the fort. So the Pennsylvania State Regiment. That's an unusual recovery. There aren't a whole lot of those even known, even among collectors apparently. And we got one in excellent, excellent archaeological context. Pennsylvania State Regiment was there and worked on that fort in the spring of 1777. 2 years ago, we recovered a small button that I think is a Connecticut regiment button, the 4th Connecticut. That's another one of these units that came in and out through the fort during the siege of Fort Mifflin. Like the Rhode Island units, the Connecticut regiments had African American soldiers recruited in their ranks, and they're serving as integrated units at that time. They're integrated into the regiments. So our plan this year will be to kind of focus on a section on the inside of the fort, which we haven't looked at in the past. We may be able to get some magnetometry done this season as well. We've identified a couple hearths inside the fort, which are just burnt fire areas. One inside and one outside of the fort. So we're going to see if we can't maybe pick up some additional evidence of hearth locations. The documentary record suggests that the Rhode Island garrison did not. There are no buildings inside of this fort. They were living in tents, and their tents were on the outside of the fort. So prior to the attack, all the tents are knocked down and everything's brought inside. That would suggest that there are hearths, fireplaces outside of the fort. If the Rhode Island unit is following any kind of military regimentation, we may actually be able to identify a series of hearths on set distances and set centers and begin to identify those kinds of things as well. So we have a number of different areas that we'll be looking at, but we'll try to focus on the inside section of the fort again this year.
Okay. So this comes to we're going to wrap up here in just a few minutes. So for students and people who are interested in learning more, want to get involved in archaeology, thinking about becoming archaeologists or public historians, what advice would you give them?
Well, that's a good question. If for a student is thinking about, I'll speak specifically to public history. I think visiting as many and varying types of historic sites out there to get a sense of just sort of the whole broad world of public history, right? There's so much that happens. It's just like mind blowing to my students when they realize that history has this whole other life outside of the classroom. And it can be historic sites, it can be museums, it can be historic house museums, it can be battlefield sites. There's a lot to explore and to study, and just start to open your eyes to see where history is in the wild out there. Because I think it's that you have to sort of like retrain your eyes to see it happening out in the world, and then getting a sense of what you like. It's not unusual for students to say to me, I'm really uncomfortable with public speaking. I really would like to do something behind the scenes. Perfect. Let's talk about what a career in like curation looks like or archives looks like. Or you might have a student who's very confident with the public. Well, let's talk about museum education and what that experience is like. And then finding a program that really works for you. Finding not all history programs offer a public history component. To be a good public historian, you have to first be a good historian. So finding a solid program that gives you the training as a historian, but also has faculty who are actively working in the field, I think is really important as well.
And I would add to that I think, I mean, as having been doing archaeological work as in cultural resource management for now 45 years, I've done a lot of these kind of projects, and there is always, in my mind, I think the interesting connection between public history and cultural resource management. There is definitely a public component to cultural resource management. Much of the funding, in our case, we get funding that's supported us that's coming from the state. that's public dollars. And if we can't explain to people why we're doing what we're doing with those dollars, it's not worth us doing. Students need to be aware of that. They also need to recognize that there's a broad range of things that archaeology can contribute to. A lot of times our students this will be the first time they've really dealt with objects to the degree that we're looking at them archaeologically. And sometimes when we get students who are coming from an anthropology background, for example, they've never even thought about historic period material. Their training has been in pre-contact or old world, but not in North American history. And so you get an interesting blend of students that come in to work on these kinds of classes and this course. It's a lot of fun to work with them and watch them grow. And we've sent a number of them on to go into graduate school and a number of other things as well. And they're seeing this as a potential career path. The archaeology to me is a way to examine. It's place based, right? And so you need to know that space. And the longer you spend and look at the space, the more you realize all the kinds of things that have happened here around you. There's nothing better than recognition that like American history happened here, and it's in this spot, and it's very unique to this spot. So knowing that makes a big difference. You can't just you can pick up a book and read about the Battle of Red Bank, but if you're not there and actually seeing the space and what happened there, that makes a big difference. And I think our students pick that up when they realize they're just touching a small piece of all of this that went on, So it's exciting to see them learn that.
I wholeheartedly agree. It's a really great experience just to see students actually when the information or the experience hits them and they start to learn and grow from the experience. And you picture that same student like talking really slowly to visitors because they think they're over explaining something like this
Yeah.
is what happened here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also think there's a collaborative approach that archaeology brings, which is really important, that none of us know it all. And so you really do need to talk to each other, because our public days that we have, we're able to compile a large number of professional archaeologists who will contribute their time. And we have avocational archaeologists who come out, and the public. And so that interaction among those groups is really exciting to see. Um, and everybody's kind of learning off of each other about what an object is or what that particular artifact is. Or, I benefit immensely by having other archaeologists who have experienced other sites that can look at a feature and go, I think that's what this is because I've seen these before, when I'm looking at it going like, wow, I've never encountered something like that before. So it's always a benefit to work on these things as a team.
Yeah. Archaeology is a team sport. I don't care what anyone else says. That is a, a fact. I'm going to go ahead and say that. That is a fact.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Well, we're about out of time. I'd like to thank you both for joining me. I really appreciate it. This has been a really great conversation, and I think the people who watch this are going to get a lot out of it.
Thanks for having
Great.
us,
Thanks
Daniel.
for having us, Dan. That's a
People want
lot
to
of fun.
learn more. We have a dedicated website. If you Google Red Bank Battlefield Park and you look up Rowan University, there's a whole website that's devoted to discussing the project and project updates. It's a great way to keep up with what we're doing.
Okay, I will make sure to include those links in the description of this video.
Thank you.
Very
Yeah,
good. Thank you.
thank you.